Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the Trijicon SRO. Trijicon released the SRO recently to much anticipation and fanfare, especially since not a lot of people knew it was coming. They didn't do a whole lot of teasing prior to the release. I was aware of it before the actual release, and I was just as excited as everybody else, but I also knew something going into it, and something that's actually very important for the purpose of this review. The SRO was not intended for duty use. So it's for duty use? No, it wasn't. Not intended for duty use. So it's good for duty, right? No, not intended for duty use. Did he say it was good for duty use? Nope, I don't think you're listening. Not intended for duty use. Oh, I wasn't listening. You say duty? Duty, good, no? No, not duty? No, not for duty? No, it's not for duty use. So it's for duty use, right? No. So it's good for duty, right? No. While the SRO shares the same mounting footprint as the venerable RMR, it is a bit of a departure from the RMR's distinct shape, the shape that lends it a lot of its durability and its rigidity. And the fact that the SRO has a very oval lens in appearance. And the reason for that is to give a larger objective window and provide an optic that's more suited for hobby shooting and or competition use. I already said, and I think I've kind of driven the point home at this point, and hopefully everybody who's listening, it wasn't intended for duty use. It doesn't mean it can't be used for duty. However, you may be accepting a larger degree of risk as far as the optic's fragility, because Trijicon departed from the shape of the RMR, which is why the RMR is so durable. As far as features go, what are we getting from the SRO that we're not getting from the RMR, or maybe some other optics out there? Well, you have, and this is something people have been asking for, especially with the Type 2, is now you have a lock-in feature. I can lock in the brightness setting that I want using the button program. I can also do a lockout, which basically renders the optic into an auto-adjust setting that most people are used to. And now I also have a night vision setting. In fact, I have two night vision settings, which are very, very useful. Now, I did scratch my head a little bit when I found out and then experienced when I was shooting the SRO that it had night vision settings, because Trijicon has been pretty evident about the fact that they did not intend the SRO for duty use. And when I think night vision, I think some form of military law enforcement use, primarily as its intended market. That being said, I know quite a few people, myself included, who aren't anymore military or law enforcement, who shoot a lot of night vision. So I did like that feature, but again, it left me kind of confused, is the fact that, like, well, it's got night vision, but you're really pushing it hard as a competition-based optic. Overall, the SRO's window is probably one of the more impressive that I've seen. It gives you a lot of space to work with, and you really, really have to be doing something wrong in order to lose your dot and recoil when shooting it on a handgun. During the review process with the SRO, actually two of them, I found that I used a 1 MOA. I prefer the 1 MOA size dot as a departure from the 6.5 to the 3.25. I'm now on the 1. I like my dot as small as possible. You really had to be doing things wrong to not even get your dot on the draw stroke, be coming from concealment or coming from a competition/duty style holster. On that note, the SRO is not really compatible with the venerable Safariland 6354DO. However, it is compatible with the RDS line of holsters, but it's not intended for duty use. You can definitely get away with using it on duty, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. As far as the window size goes, some people talked about is it too big, is it too small? And I don't know why anybody would think it would be too small. I think some people were actually wishing for a larger window, but it's still a handgun. But to the point, this window is large enough that you're not really going to have any consistent issues, especially for newer shooters, with dot acquisition, regardless of which dot size you choose. As far as co-witnessing or using iron sights in the event that your dot fails, your standard suppressor height sights are going to work fine on whatever platform or whatever method you happen to be mounting it, unless that platform precluded the use of sights previously. So if you have a milled gun for an RMR, you're going to be good to go, unless you have an irons forward configuration. Because the SRO sits further forward, it's not going to work with irons forward guns. It's just not something you're going to be able to do. So if you're like me and you prefer the irons in front of the optic, you are going to be limited to what guns you can use it on, or maybe not at all if you don't own a milled gun that has irons to the rear. Specifically about the LED, brightness was excellent. Bright sunny days like today, overcast, everything worked great. Shooting it under low light and night vision, the night vision settings I thought were great. especially with the 1 MOA. I would have liked to have had the 5 MOA to check that out as well, but on a 1 MOA using night vision setting 1, night vision setting 2, the halo was so minimal I didn't even really need to use an IR light to push down range and get target ID, unless I was trying to push through that smoke that comes from just, you know, shooting in that general muzzle blast. Generally under night vision, the muzzle blast kind of exaggerates itself unless you're pushing through it with some kind of powerful light like an IR illuminator. But overall, and of course this is worth mentioning too, people are going to bring up the fact that it still has a blue tint. I think a lot of people don't understand what that blue tint is, why that blue tint's there, and why you actually want that blue tint. That blue tint is a notch filter. It limits a spectrum of light from transferring through the optic window, which allows you to see the LED easier than you'd be able to see it without that filter. So if you were to remove the filter, that means the LED would have to work harder for you to be able to use the dot during the day, which means your battery life would be significantly less. So while the blue is, some people, I don't really notice it myself, but I also don't really notice window size anymore myself. I've gotten so used to presentation and dot acquisition and tracking dot through recoil and just shooting target focus and not staring at the window and really looking through the window, I don't really notice a difference. Is there a distortion? I think that literally, no pun intended, is in the eye of the beholder. I think a lot of people's idea of distortion or slight magnification is coming from the fact that one eye is looking through an objective lens of glass and the other eye is unobjected, or I should say unobstructed, looking at the target. If you stay dot focus, I don't know why you would do that, but if you stay dot focus, you may notice a little bit more slight magnification or a little bit more of the blue notch filter. But going back to it, you want that blue tint because that's where you get your superior battery life. And on the SRO, you're looking at a potential battery life of 4 years. Me personally, conservatively, depending on settings, I would still change the battery out annually, but annually is really good. 365 calendar days is excellent battery, especially when, if I'm changing my battery out annually, I'm probably not too worried about trying to conserve it with what settings I leave it on. I'm probably going to put it on my all-day setting, all-night setting, and lock it in and leave it at that. Getting specifically into the review process, you know, the first thing I'm going to do is that 500 round burn down. I'm going to put 500 rounds through the firearm as fast as possible to see if that accelerated live fire cycle of fire is going to cause any problems with the optic. Generally with optics, especially when it comes to heat, for example, I'm not going to generate enough heat in the handgun to really affect the optic, but it's still something that I want to check. And maybe, you know, in that 500 round accelerated life cycle or rate of fire, I experience a failure because of the reciprocation. Who knows? So here's your burn down. 500 rounds without a hitch. Not a big deal at all. After that, I went into the normal testing process, getting ready for that first drop test, which is going to occur before the next 500 rounds. One thing that people brought up is one-handed manipulations, and that's something I'm going to do on every optic. And I have to stress the fact that the review process that I'm putting this optic through is the review process that I put every optic through. But to certain questions, we're like, hey, can you, is it going to be fragile, or are you going to be able to break it with one-hand manipulations? Again, reiterating, this is not primarily intended for duty use. That being said, treat every optic the same way, so I did quite a few one-handed manipulations without any issues. Didn't affect zero, didn't affect the optic, it didn't damage the optic, it didn't crack the screen. Everything went great. The body itself is 70-75 aluminum, so short of a significant impact from a drop, per se, I don't think you're going to be able to create any significant failure issues or breakage issues with the SRO just by using it to manipulate the slide off of foreign objects like cover or your personal carry gear. And of course, the moment of truth, the moment that most people are waiting for, and also the largest point of contention with people having critiques about my review process, the drop test. If you're not familiar, for a 2,000 round review process, I'm going to drop the optic within 500 rounds. So every 500 rounds plus or minus, it's going to get a drop. So during 2,000 rounds, it gets dropped 4 times shoulder height on a hard surface, preferably concrete, but whatever's clever or whatever's available, depending on which range I happen to be using. this is not a scientific test. Gravity is the only real equal there, and of course my height, but I can't always be very specific with exactly what height I hold it at. The whole reason for the drop test is to see if the optic can handle an extreme shock. If it can take the abuse. My personal opinion, my professional opinion, if a duty optic can't handle a drop like that, it's not a duty optic. The good news about this is, though, is the SRO is not intended for duty use. So here's that first drop. Well, that's that. Hey, you guys, remember when I said that the SRO wasn't primarily intended for duty use? This is why. They got away from the RMR shape for the reasons that go into the fact that this optic was intended for primarily competition hobby shooting. Because it's new doesn't mean it's going to be the new greatest latest replacement for your duty optic. So if you're carrying an optic for self-defense in a duty role, I would not recommend the SRO. However, for competition use, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a better optic with better features at a better price. The window, the LED options, even for hobby shooting, it's going to be great. For concealed carry, and this is a question that I feel like I should address, is if it's not good enough for duty, would you recommend it for concealed carry? I don't see a significant problem with this optic for concealed carry, because just the general purpose and the intent of the firearm is going to be slightly different. It's not going to be in the same environments. It's not going to have the same risk of coming in contact with the same surfaces as a duty optic carried in a duty holster. That being said, me personally, I would not carry it as a self-defense optic, period. This would be an optic I'd use for competition or hobby-based shooting. It is an excellent optic, and it's got all the great features that you're used to from Trijicon, all the great performance, all the great battery life, and it is a top-loading battery which appeals to a lot of people. However, it's not intended for duty use. While the SRO did fail my review process twice, I've actually tested 2 of them, so my sample size wasn't 1, they both failed on their first drop. That does not mean if you have one and you drop it, it's going to break. It means mine broke 2 separate drops. Broken is broken, so as I've showed you guys, the glass is completely spidered. However, there is a small window of clear glass remaining that I could potentially use in an emergency situation if my optic broke in a self-defense situation and I still needed to shoot. Yeah, I'd be shooting in parallax, but as I've demonstrated in videos in the past, you can shoot in parallax through an RDS and still be able to be accurate. That being said, this is not something that I would ever recommend for duty carry. For concealed carry, I'm going to leave that up to the individual. I personally still wouldn't recommend it because the durability is just not there. But, you know, caveat emptor. Yeah, you go ahead and make your own decisions based on the information that's available to you. What I would advise you against is buying this optic and using it to replace your RMR because you feel like the settings are advantageous and it has a top-loading battery. The top-loading battery is super nice, but again, it's an optic that we're changing the battery once a year. And if you're really frugal, every other year, depending on the use and settings that you use. It's not something that I would recommend. The electronics package, I do like the fact that now I have night vision settings and I can lock in or lock out the brightness settings. I think that's awesome, and I expect to see all 3 of those features in the next generation of the RMR from Trijicon. But the SRO is not the next generation of RMR from Trijicon. That's why it's got a totally different name and it's got a totally different purpose. For competition use, if you're going to shoot steel match, IDPA, IPSC, open, whatever, this deserves a hard look, and it's probably going to end up replacing whatever optic you're currently using because it's vastly superior, in my opinion, for what I'm looking for in a competition optic than anything else that's currently out there that's being used on handguns. I'm Eric Allen with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.